coming. I know how busy everyone is, and as I say, it's a school night and a legislative night, and so I really believe this is an important topic, and it's an important pivot point in the history of Nevada with the rise of nonpartisan voters. So I want to tell you all that I really appreciate your coming, and those watching on the live stream, we appreciate you too, just not quite as much. So thanks for watching. Before we get started, I do want to thank our sponsors, and Cindy Carano is here from Caesars and the Rose. Stand up, Cindy. Come on. Thank you. And she's sitting. Rick, stand up. Rick is the guy who made this happen, and I really do appreciate that. Thank you very much. It's not easy to keep a nonprofit going, and they were very understanding about that and gave us a great deal, and we really do appreciate it. Carrera, Nevada, consistent sponsor of our events. Kemfer Kroll, who's also helped the Indy, and I don't know where Sev is, but I understand they have a few good lawyers there, so there he is. And of course, Reno Sparks Chamber of Commerce, another consistent supporter. I don't know where the Carson City Chamber of Commerce is. Oh, wait a second, they're the cheapskates. Okay. Anyhow, we appreciate everybody who supports the Indy. You know, this is I've been around way too long, and I've done a lot of things in journalism, and I've said this a lot, and some of you may have heard me say it, but the Indy is by far the best thing that I've ever done in journalism, and it's the one, and maybe this is not a coincidence, that has the least to do with me. And that's because of just the wonderful people I work with, and many of them are here tonight. They are the best people, most talented people, and best human beings I've ever worked with, and it's an honor to work with them every day. This has been so important. I believed when I started the Indy that there was a yearning out there for fair, transparent, in-depth, policy-focused journalism, and we have been rewarded by our readership increasing a lot every year. I like to give the stat. Obviously, when we started on January 17th of 2017, we had 0 readers. Last year, we had 5 million unique visitors to the site. So it's a tribute to the work of this team, and I appreciate everybody coming tonight. So here's how tonight's going to work. I want this to be a conversation, and I hope that all 4 of these wonderful panelists will interact with each other, and if they don't, I will force them to. But I couldn't have asked for a better panel. But I want you to be part of the evening as well. So about a half hour in or so, I'm not sure, I'm going to ask people to line up behind that mic if you have questions for anybody on the panel. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So now I'm going to sit down and introduce the panel, and we'll get going. I actually wrote some of this down. So, first of all, I am just thrilled to have, I have to say this, and it's by way of disclosure, but I'm also very proud of it. Hillary Schieve is a very good friend of mine. We actually share a bond. Most people don't know that we share, which is that we both got kidney transplants, and we got kidneys from our siblings, and we've shared that bond ever since we first met. But that's not why she's here tonight. She is here so I can make fun of her. No, I'm kidding. As many of you know, Hillary was first elected back in 2014, and this was after a successful career as an entrepreneur. And then she became a city councilwoman, but she registered as a nonpartisan. Many of you may not know that, and it's the reason I wanted her here tonight to talk about why she did that, and we will get to that. On Hillary's right is another very, very old friend of mine who I've shared many drinks with, and he has tried, generally unsuccessfully, to impart wisdom at the late Adele's in Carson City, and that's Don Carlson, who was a retired professor and pollster. He's worked with Dean Heller and Mark Amodei and many, many others. He is the Carson City guru, and he is one of the keenest, studies of voting patterns and voting behaviors, and that is the reason I wanted him to be here. And I guarantee that Don will have some very provocative thoughts about why people are switching and what their behavior will be or might be in coming elections. To my left over here, we have two activists who specialize in mobilizing voters, and they are going to have to find new ways to mobilize voters, I would think, in the coming years. Cecia Alvarado, how did I do? Not bad. Okay, I've been practicing all day. She is the state director of a very important group in Nevada that some of you may have heard of, called Mi Familia Vota, and she has for many years, more than a decade, been trying to reach out to Hispanic voters and get them active in politics. I'll be really interested to hear what she has to say about the rise of nonpartisans. Right next to me here is Yindra Dixon, who does a lot of different things. Am I right?
You are right.
That's what I thought. I love the name of her consulting firm, though, Blackbox Consulting. It's as if she's saying to everybody, you don't know what I do, and I'm not going to tell you what I do. I mean, it's just, it's a great name. And she has had experience, too, in programs to mobilize African-American voters, and I'd be very interested to hear what she has to say. So before we get started, these are very busy people. They traveled all the way here. Let's give them a round of applause for coming tonight. And I thank you. Thank you very much. So let's get started. So let me start with you, Mayor. Why did you become an independent voter? You have to use that, despite your booming voice. Okay.
I just don't think I've ever identified.
I don't think that's
Can
on.
you hear me?
Now it's on. Okay.
Now it's on. Okay,
Okay.
there you go. I just don't think I've ever identified with a party. I just don't think it's black and white. I don't think politics should be like that. And I think, quite honestly, I mean, as mayors, we always say there's no Democratic or Republican way to clean a street. And it's very true. What's interesting is I'm very involved in the Conference of Mayors. And I'm actually, there's only like maybe 3 or 4 other nonpartisan mayors in the country too, which is really interesting. But most mayors, quite honestly, and it's sort of half and half, I'd say, Democrat, Republican mayors really work well together. And I think that's why you've really seen a rise in so many mayors and kind of going to that national level. But I just don't believe it's black and white. And I've seen, and it's also changed so dramatically, I think, in the last 4 years, but I also don't believe because the party tells you to think one way, you should think that way. I quite honestly, on my ballot, it's pretty even, Democrats and Republicans.
Want to name names? I'm kidding. Go ahead.
But I think it's, I just have always voted people, not party. And you got to remember, too, you're not always going to agree. I mean, there's, I like working with Congressman Amodei a lot, and there's a lot of things I don't agree with him on. But I have to tell you, whenever I call him, he picks up the phone. He's incredibly responsive. He's been very, very good to Reno in a lot of ways. Does that mean I always agree with him? No. So I just like that you can reach across the aisle and actually get something done. Because it has become so divisive. And I think almost there's 4 parties now. Whenever I look at it, you have Democrats, and then you have more on the left, and then you have Republicans, and then you have more on the right. And it's become super, super divisive. I don't know how you get anything done when you sort of look at it that way and really say, I have to toe the party line. I don't believe that.
I have to tell you, some of you out there are probably thinking, oh, she's such a phony. She's too good to be true. She was like this before she was elected. It was really annoying then as well. But just real quickly before I move on, you weren't always an independent. How long ago did you become a nonpartisan?
Oh, gosh, it's been a long, long time. The whole time.
The whole time?
Yeah, I have the whole time.
But it is true that the Democratic Party has tried to woo you to switch. Is that right?
Several times.
That's what I thought. Okay. All right. Let me go to Don Carlson. And some people have pointed out, and it's true, that some of the rise in nonpartisans has to do with the motor voter Bill, and that it's a default at the DMV, that if you don't register at the DMV, you default to nonpartisan. But that doesn't explain all of it. What does?
Well, what I would like to try to contribute first is to define who are the NPs presently. And the process that I have used is to stratify by age. And I combined the baby boomers with the silent generation, sometimes called the traditional generation. And of those Nevadans that are in that age cohort, 17% are nonpartisans. The second age cohort I created was Generation Xers. And by the way, baby boomers on 57 on is 17% are nonpartisan. Generation Xers are, if you will, people 39 to 56. And the percent of Generation Xers that are NPs are around 24, 25%. And what's interesting about the X generation is the events that happen culturally, which is noteworthy. 1, cable television. 2, 24-hour news television. 3, and maybe most importantly, dying AM radio was salvaged by talk radio, and welcome Rush Limbaugh and all of the people who wanted to be Rush Limbaugh locally. The next stage cohort is my favorite sociological animal, the millennials. And the millennials are a huge portion of the population. And they happen to amount to 32% of them are NPs. And one of the cultural things you need to know about millennials, they were born during great economic success, and they entered the labor market during the Great Recession. And lastly, and most importantly, they were introduced to polarized politics. Thank you, Newt Gingrich and others. And the last generation that I created, I call iGen. Other researchers call it Generation Z. So boring, so unimaginative. I call them the iGen. Lowercase I, uppercase G, because the 18 to 24-year-olds are iPhone natives. And a couple very important observations. Newspapers died during their birth and their growth. And most disturbingly, they were initiated to tribal politics. We've gone from polarized politics to tribalized politics. So that, I hope, gives you an insight as to who are the NPs. And the one thing I want to suggest to you, check the data a year from now and check the data in September, and you're going to see even a greater shift to the NP assignment rather than the partisan assignment.
Can you repeat all those stats if I asked you to, like right away?
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat all those stats if I asked you to? He could. Yeah, I'm telling you, this guy's been doing it for like 50 years, and he's still as good as ever. Yindra, let me ask you something. You've heard that breakdown. When you talk to voters and you want to get, do they express this kind of alienation, the tribalism, and the disgust with major parties?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the number one statement is what has X party done for me, right? They consume social media news, and that is the way that news is. We've lost network television. That's another thing that has happened generationally for us. And so not being able to have trustworthy, independent, transparent news like the Independent, like the Independent provides, certainly will skew how people view their politics, because the way that they receive them is in an echo chamber. I am friends with people who think like me, and I can control who is in my group of people who think like me and what I want to believe is truth and not truth. And then in addition to that, you think about how we have, there's a lot of investment in STEM. This may seem like a little bit of a tangent, but there's a lot of investment in STEM because there's an importance to understanding science and the scientific process. And the reason we invest in that is so that people can understand what truth is. That's how we reinforce truth. And so being a part of a group of people who have something that is called false truth, right? Your ability to edit a photo, to edit a video, to have it see whatever you want it to see. All of those things create this false truth. And what becomes true is what goes viral, right? Like if it's 1,000 views or 1 million views or 5 million views, that's more significant to people than whether or not the content that they're viewing is true. And in addition to that, they're not going out to see where the rest of, where other people fall, right? Because they're in that echo chamber, and that's what they want to believe. And they're not going to discern between what is real and what is not, right? Like, is this an actual fact? Is there a source behind this? Is this not just somebody's crazy drunk uncle over a Thanksgiving meal giving them some advice or telling them what is true? So for sure, I think throughout all of voters' minds, it is hard to discern truth, to understand where the source of this information comes from, and then to really see today in my real life, what have these groups done for me?
Cecia, let me ask you a question. Mi Familia Vota, in case people don't know, is known in political circles as one of the most effective voter registration mobilization groups. I'm not just saying that to flatter you, and I promise you there's no but coming. The reason I start that way is that, have you had to change the way that you operate because you see this rise of nonpartisan voters? Don broke down what the various cohorts are very well, and Yindra talked about how they don't believe in certain things anymore. They're not sure where to find truth. Have you had to change the way you do what you do because of this?
It's on.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. I'm reflecting when every single one of you have said very valid points, and then I'm reflecting in my work as Mi Familia Vota, but I'm also as a Latina, as an immigrant. With the Latino community, you have, and we keep hearing Latinos are monolithic, but do you really understand what that implies? You have immigrant Latinos voters, you have first generations, you have Spanish speakers Latinos, and then you have maybe second or third generations that are English, primarily English speaking Latinos, and we can go out and talk to them and use one message fits all. So yes and no. Yes, because we do have to adapt an understanding that we have different, like the younger generations of Latinos that are more issue-driven when it comes to voter registration. But then you also have the Latinos that are really victims of misinformation. They are prey on just misinformation across the board. Then when it comes to media, our resources are extremely limited. So I'm here having a discussion in English. This probably wouldn't happen in Spanish. Never had a discussion in Spanish at all. We never talked about it because, one, our Spanish-speaking media is so limited. They're limited in resources, and also you have to pack 30 minutes of news. If we're talking about local media, they don't talk about politics. So if you're a Spanish speaker and you consume news through the Spanish media, you don't know. You only know what maybe what your family is talking about, maybe what your friends. So when we go out in the field, and this is what we always say over and over, we meet the community where they're at, but not just that, we adapt the message to our community that we're reaching. So yes and no, we kind of have been doing this, that I know that we work with faith groups. If I'm gonna go and talk to a faith group about voter registration, it's a whole completely approach that if I'm gonna go to a high school and talk to a high school students about voter registration, and the same thing when we're out in the supermarket. So it's adapting that messaging, but it's also understanding how unique and the unique message for every group.
You do know that the Indy has a Spanish language page, do you not?
I do, and I'm actually, I am a loyal reader. But when it comes to politics, have you hosted one of these in Spanish?
We're
gonna call them out now.
No, it's great that you brought that up, because I just had, you may know Luz Gray, who's done a phenomenal job with her, and I've told her what we need to do is go into the Spanish-speaking community and do these kinds of events in the Spanish-speaking community, because I don't you think there would be an appetite for this kind of event?
I have been in Nevada for 20 years, and I'm not a voter. I am still not a U.S. citizen, so we are out, and I always say I find my voice through the people that I mobilize, and that's what I'm so passionate about it. But when it comes to, like, when it comes to like messaging for the Latino Spanish-speaking community, I never seen it, so please, I hope you invite me to the Spanish one too.
Absolutely, we will. No. I really, that's one of the goals. Every one of my staff will tell you that we've talked about that, and I really want to do that. And maybe you can help us organize that. Even I hear you're a decent organizer. Okay, so let me just go back to Don real quickly here, and then I'll come back to the mayor and Yindra. Don, when you're out there, if you're running campaigns now, or if you're trying to govern, as Hillary Schieve is, are there? I mean, there's no group is monolithic, and I'm glad Cecia pointed that out, and it's especially true of the Latino community. But and you pointed out how it's not monolithic even among the cohorts that you mentioned in terms of nonpartisans. Are they interested in different kinds of issues than Democrats and Republicans are interested in?
Well, I think the first generalization about UPs is, well, let me approach this this way. If one is a candidate, a partisan candidate, and they're running for office, I would recommend they get 12 to 15 NPs for a little conversation. And the first thing that Republican or that Democrat running for office ought to ask, what is threatening about my party? And what is reassuring about my party? And what is threatening about my opponent's party? And what is reassuring about my opponent's party? And in the bottom line, most NPs want things to work. They want it to function. They want efficiency, but they want it to work. And there is just such frustration that both parties are so busy being partisan that they are not focusing on Program X working. And I really believe NPs really have an opportunity to teach some candidates this coming November about what is frustrating them.
You mean they can beat them?
Pardon me?
You mean they can beat them?
Well, I really think if the trends continue, and I think they will, I think the NPs, especially in statewide races, are going to be the determining factor. And I'm talking about in congressional races, in the state offices, and the United States Senate. They will be the determining factor. I think it's going to be fascinating for me, and I'm just an old war horse that's retired and watching. I'm going to be so fascinated watching certain ad agencies and certain candidacies.
Well, it's interesting. I think I'm the only guy in the world more obsessed with numbers than Don Carlson, and I've been following this, as some of you might know, and I know Doug Goodman has been as well. I mean, non-major party voters are going to be probably in Washoe County ahead of the major party voters within a year. It may take slightly less than that, may take a little bit longer. And in Clark County, you are going to have independent voters, not including the others, overtake the Republicans relatively soon. So there is really something going on. Does it?
May I add one more point?
Of course.
The thing that I fear, but I suspect we'll see most of these partisans will absolutely emphasize polarized politics, and some of these partisans will even emphasize tribal politics. And boy, if you want to turn off the NPs, that's the switch.
So in this era as Don points out, Mayor, tribal politics and more polarization, whether it's out in the electorate or within a city council, perhaps, does it make it more difficult for you to do your job? I mean, it's not just about filling potholes, right? You do a lot more than that. So does it make it more difficult?
Well, quickly, I define tribal politics very simply. In tribal politics, people do not have opponents, they have enemies. And the first thing you try to do is crush your enemy. And then you absolutely are forbidden to discuss compromise.
So Mayor, talk about that. Has it made your job tougher?
Pardon me?
I'm talking to the mayor. Has it made your job tougher, Mayor?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I see it on my council, especially like when it comes time to elections. To be honest with you, it gets very, very frustrating. It's really interesting, though, and more people like to talk to me about being a nonpartisan because they're saying to me, oh, I'm a Democrat, but really, I'm not identifying with them, or I'm a Republican, I no longer identify with them, I'm really a nonpartisan. I'm hearing that more and more. But Councilwoman Jardin, she was a Republican, she just changed parties, she's a nonpartisan. So, we've had a lot of conversation about that. But I definitely see it, where it gets super partisan more towards the election time and when they're surrounded by their parties a lot. And remember, those parties also help them raise a lot of money. And it's really nice to not be beholden to a party and certain groups that have paid a lot of money to keep them there. But it's definitely harder. Even though council races are nonpartisan, you still see it very, very much. And it is frustrating, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Can I make a quick point?
Please, jump in. Any of you should jump in at any time, please.
I just wanted to make sure I was following the protocol. So I think Mayor Schieve makes a great point about how getting work done and how many people want to change to be nonpartisans. But when we really think about it, either of the parties has always been a coalition. We used to have blue dogs and all these different names of different types of Democrats and Republicans, and it used to be, easier to discern. But right now, the narrative has been hijacked by the extremists. So you're either a socialist or you are anti-science, racist, misogynist, anti-immigrant, whatever. And so that's the tribal politics that we're emphasizing, right? You're at the total ends of that. However, the bell curve suggests that everybody in the middle is essentially moderate, right? Like everybody wants that. And it's much harder, especially in politics, to follow the party line. And to feel as though your specific small voice is being heard, right? And so it's much easier for us to then say, or to speculate, nonpartisans are on the rise because of X. But what I will say is, and you made a great point, Mayor Schieve, about money. The money is binary. Until somebody, with billions of dollars decides to stand up enough money, or we go to completely publicly funded elections or some other structure, we will only have this two-party system because the money is binary. And so if the outcomes can reach this majority and that majority identifies more moderately and as nonpartisans, then all of us, or not all of us, but we will all continue to be what we are, which is nonpartisans. We all believe in something really strongly, identify maybe with one party, but we don't identify with every single thing on the list. And so to me, that's really where, until we moderate the narrative, and the party that will win will be the one that is able to manage the coalition the best. That's the party that will end up victorious.
You agree with that?
100%. 100, always. No, I agree. And again, when we come to this side with the Latinos, it's a little bit different because Latinos don't really invest a whole lot in politics. They don't put in a lot of money into as individual donors, or they are not entrepreneurial, wealthy Latinos putting money into politics. So we do have more say in the money as Latinos, then perhaps we can make some changes. But it also with the groups, yes, the money, and then at the end of the election, I'm reflecting to understand if when we are talking about the Latino community as nonpartisans, where we have stand in the last few years. We have been in the middle of a political war, basically. We're being used as immigrants, as the group that is being under attack. We're gonna get rid of them, we're gonna kick them out, we're gonna send them back. So we have been at the center, and who has come out in our defense? So you gotta think about that too. Who has come out in our defense as to say, we care about immigration. Obviously we do, because we're being attacked for being immigrants. For the simple fact of being immigrants, that we have become the target. But what about the economy too? What about other issues that we also care about? And so it's not the stream, it's to say, we poll Latinos before the election, and we asked them, and they couldn't answer what Democrats stand for. They just couldn't answer. So if we asked them, what did they stand for? They just didn't know. What do the Republicans stand for? Anti-immigrants. So I think you gotta look at that too.
Well, I think it's interesting what you're saying, and the whole issue of groups not being monolithic, which we've talked a little bit about as well, Cecia, but it's generally true, I would think, that even though you can't generalize that much about this, is Latinos have a certain distrust that is of government because of, for instance, even though I think it's facile to say the number one issue is immigration, the way that both parties have handled immigration, I think may have something to do with what we're talking about, in the sense that it has been so demagogued, it has been used as a wedge issue, or if I'm and if I'm saying something that's not true, please tell me. I would think a lot of Latinos think, the Democrats talk a good game. They say they're our friends, but nothing has happened. And so, don't you think that's driving maybe some of this distrust of the parties, or lack of faith in the party that's supposed to be helping you to get people to say, I'm leaving. I'm going to be an NP.
We bring our own experiences, right, from our countries. So as a Costa Rican, I'll bring my experiences of governments from Costa Rica. And then this is where you have immigrants from Cuba that are so distrust in when it comes to socialism, and then you have the Latinos or immigrants from South America that are extremely conservative. So, and then you have the Latinos from Central America that, like, one of our number one issues is immigration. And you have Latinos from Mexico. And so then we can go to Europe too. But what I'm saying is, let's look at Nevada. Number one immigrants in Nevada are from Mexico. So what is the messaging for them? And then number two is from El Salvador. So two different issues, two different groups. So it really just comes down to one, when it comes to Latinos and our experiences with politics, yes, we bring our traumas from our countries. And one of the reasons why so many Latinos or immigrants migrate to the U.S., it's seeking not just better economic growth, but also being able to live under a different government. So the corruptions, but also like understanding that when we are talking Latino, do they know how Republicans are helping them with economic growth? Do they know who's helping them have access to healthcare? They have no idea. They don't know who's responsible for the good or bad sometimes. They only understand what's happening at a federal level. But when it comes down to special local elections, they don't know. And this is what you see, like they vote for presidential, and then you see them losing down the ballot and losing the Latino vote down the ballot. And it's not because people skip, they just don't know, like who's reaching them, like who's talking to them, who's actually taking the time, and not just going to East Las Vegas, because everyone tries to go to East Las Vegas, they try to speak Spanish to you during election time, and as soon as the election is over, like they forget their Spanish, or they drop their apps, or they don't speak Spanish to us anymore. But then you also have Latinos that live in Summerlin, you have Latinos that live in Washoe County, you have Latinos in rural towns. Who's talking to them? And it doesn't have to be in Spanish.
So I think that's a really great point, because I think it really harps on identity politics, right? Like as a country, we focus on race. That's how we have been able to wield control. That's how we have been able to continuously oppress communities. And so what Cecia highlights in the Latino community is similar in any ethnic community or any other race community as well. I always tell people I haven't woken up Black a single day. When I wake up in the morning, I brush my teeth, I feed my kids, I walk the dogs, I make sure there's dinner prepared for later, I go to work, and until I walk out of my door, I don't have any understanding of what Black even is, right? It's undefinable. But there is certainly how I show up in the world as a woman who has to identify Black, because that's the identity that's been given to me. There are some expectations. But in the same way, right, that we bring that same trauma of history from coming over as the descendants of slaves, or immigrating here from all over the continent of Africa, the Caribbean, from South America, where people have dark skin, from Asia, where people have dark skin and therefore are considered to be Black. The diaspora is very diverse, and we have that same exact experience, right? That at election time, our needs are top of the line, right? All of a sudden, people are so excited. And again, they go to the West Side, and I live over in Summerlin, right? And so if we are going to attract voters to a specific party, we have to talk to them as human beings. We have to understand what the real issues are, and it gives us an opportunity as a party to get back to the values of the party. This is why we have organized ourselves in this way. These are the things that we actually believe in. These are the ways that we can bring progress. And then we have to take that step towards equity and inclusion. We have to have people who look like all of us at the table. There's not a single, article that you can't read that doesn't tell you about the value of diversity. It is valuable for economic growth, for education, for social problems, for everything. In order to solve the problems in these communities, go to the communities. I bet they have a solution, right? So all of those things are a part of where all of the parties are failing. One, because it's two parties, and they're super, super big. And they're led by white people, but that's a whole nother conversation for another day.
Let me add something to that. Yes, you're reaching Latino voters, but if they are eligible voters, they're U.S. citizens, and treat them just like it. Stop treating them like immigrants. Stop treating them as like they don't understand English, that they're less educated. So if anyone is eligible to vote, if you're talking to our community, the Latino community, and they are eligible to vote, whether they speak Spanish or not, they're also U.S. citizens. And so, when it comes to politics, it feels like, whoa, Latinos, okay, so we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk in Spanish, I'm going to talk about immigration, and very general. Like, I think they're taking us for granted, and they're undermining our own ability to understand politics, and so this is why you're losing them, because it's like, it's the same, you're not different than the politics from my country. You're just coming to us, giving us, the pet talk during election time, and then you leave, and you never talk to us again, and you talk about housing, and you talk about immigration, but that's it. I will never hear back from you again.
So, with Yindra's permission, I'm going to talk to some of the white people for a second. Is that all right?
I mean,
But seriously, and by the way, I do think that the way that people in positions like mine think about diversity, we need to be educated, I think more, and I think that, and we've had internal discussions about this, about diversity, and we're trying to be better about it, and I think diversity for diversity's sake doesn't necessarily make sense, but you got to think about it, because look at the perspectives that both of you are bringing to this that maybe some people in this room had not thought of, and so we didn't just pay lip service to it, and I'm glad we got two great activists here talking about this. But going back to the white mayor of Reno for a second, what responsibility do you think you have as an elected nonpartisan to be talking about issues like this and to do something? Because you don't hear most politicians, unless they're attacking the other party, talk about these kinds of issues. And do you have a responsibility? You are a very prominent elected official in this state. And don't look at me skeptically. You are.
That's not what my email says.
and I'm just wondering, do you talk about it at all? Should you talk about it more?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think it's interesting because a lot of these conversations make people very uncomfortable. It's really interesting, but I think we have to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations to sort of get through them and make headway. But, and you kind of touched on this just a little bit, and I kind of want to bring this up because I noticed this so much, especially within the parties. So many politicians are so afraid to even speak up in the party whenever they don't agree with them. And I think that is really, really dangerous. And so, when I look at someone like Liz Cheney, good for her, you know what I mean? But more politicians need to be doing that. And God forbid if you disagree with your own party, I've just seen some of the things that go along with that. And it's not nice. It's not nice at all. And it's really hampering us to have these really open and honest conversations that you two bring up. Because that's exactly what happens during election time, is that people will look at a certain issue and just, know that it's, hot and run with it. It was interesting, and I think we had a conversation about this, about Frank Luntz. He's, this incredible pollster like you, my friend, Frank. But he was talking, because I said, well, honestly, like, what do we agree on, Democrats and Republicans? And he said, actually, really the only thing is technology and connectivity. I thought that was really interesting, but there's not a lot, and I find that really sad, but that goes to show you how unwilling I think the parties are to be able to reach across the aisle, because you always hear that too. Oh, I'm willing to reach across the aisle. Well, really, because those 3 other years you didn't do it, but now you are starting to say that you're willing to do it. Well, I'm still not seeing that, and I think that's frustrating.
It's interesting that you mentioned Naomi Jardin, who was known to be a Republican when she ran. She was supported by a lot of Republicans. Why did she tell you that she became a nonpartisan?
She got really, just tired of it. I think, especially this last year, got so polarizing and just I got to tell you, it's been tough. I mean, just the last few years to be a politician is really interesting. It's difficult in a lot of ways, and that's why I just was telling someone that I go to the grocery store at 11:55 at night. But she just got sick of some of the party politics, and I also think too in Nevada, this is just my view, and I obviously I'm come from the north, and so it's probably very different from the south. And I don't focus on a lot of the politics happening in the South. I just don't. But it's interesting. I also think the Republican Party up here is so fragmented And it's like, it's almost as if it doesn't even exist. And so, she was telling me, I mean, she doesn't feel like she can identify with that party at all. She thinks it's, she's completely lost it, especially this last couple of years.
So I want to bring Don back into this conversation, and I also want to start taking questions from you. It's a little past 7 o'clock, so if you have questions, we're going to turn on this mic here and just get in front of the mic. And I know a lot of you out here, you're not shy. I want to hear some good questions. But Don, Yindra mentioned something I thought was interesting, and a few years ago, more than a few years ago, a guy named Jim Rogers, who was the head of a TV empire here in this state, talked about running for governor as an independent. And he was sick of it all, and I knew Jim pretty well. I worked for Jim. And he was sick of both parties. He was sick of nothing getting done and all this. And then he did a poll, and he talked to people and said, an independent can't win in this state. You're crazy. Don't do it. And I forget how many years ago. It was between 5 and 10 years ago. If, as Yindra puts it, someone with that kind of money or something like that kind of money were to say, I am going to run as an independent, and I'm not talking about no offense for city council or for a district office, but for a statewide office, would that person have a chance these days in Nevada?
Well, there are certain conditions that I would like more details on.
You academics never give a yes or no. Never.
But to generalize, the first issue a nonpartisan would have is, do I have the ability to raise the appropriate funds? For example, I do not believe an NP could be a candidate for governor unless that candidate had $6 to $8 million.
Let's say that exists. Let's say that person is worth tens of millions of dollars or a billionaire. Okay, let's start with that.
Okay, then that worry is
Right.
over with. My second concern then would be, does that individual have the interpersonal skills to relate to voters? And I'm talking about relating to voters, not just who are NPs, but I'm talking about Rs and Ds. It is my view that if NPs could vote in our primary,
Oh, here we go.
one of the things you would see is a significant loss of Republicans from the Republican Party and a significant loss of Democrats from the Democratic Party, because both parties are in trouble. If you will, using Robert Putnam's model from Bowling alone, the civic health of the Democratic Party and the civic health of the Republican Party, not just in Nevada, in the United States, is in question. And yes, a viable candidate with money who has the skill to interact with all voters, yes.
I disagree.
Because there is an appetite for an alternative.
I disagree.
Disagree.
I do.
You going to tell me why?
I am.
Okay, good.
Not just on the merits. No, I agree that a rich person can run and win. I agree that a person with charisma can run and win, right? What I don't agree with is, how does a person who is aligned with the anti-Dem, anti-Republican group of people who don't identify with any one thing have a message that gets across to those people? Because part of the problem in the big party structure, and we know it from the field, is that if you don't knock every door, if you don't understand and connect with people on their specific issues in order to do that, like, the more doors you knock, the more successful you will be. And so in this case, we're saying that that person, I mean, they'd have to have almost 3 times that money in a campaign in order to hit every door, understand, analyze the information that they're taking back, to then create a message that would resonate with all NPs, because the only thing that we know they are is not R or not D.
Well, I'm teasing, but I'm serious. That multimillionaire needs to hire me, and I will help him or her communicate to various pockets of the populace.
I love that. All right, let's take some questions if you guys don't mind. Mr. Ray Bacon.
As John, as you know, I've been a nonpartisan forever, which since I'm not that much younger than Don Carlson means it's been a long time. In all my years of voting, I have had one survey that came from an NP that asked the questions of, what are the issues for you? And that person, by the way, did not win, but they beat, I can't remember, they beat the D or they beat the R and things like that. That's a question which is not asked, because if that question were asked, I think Don's point of there would be Ds that would become Rs, and there would Ds that would become NPs, and Rs that become MPs, if the right question were asked, and it's never asked. I get almost nothing in the mail that is addressed to me because I'm a nonpartisan. And the data is out there, and for the people on both sides to not make special mailings is stupid. Number two, I think a lot of people are NPs because the real issue from their standpoint is employment-related issues. And I don't care whether you're Hispanic, whether you're black, whether you're green, whether you're purple or whatever, and things like that. The issue now in this state, because coming out of the pandemic, but even more important, if we're going to have this shift towards my sector, the manufacturing sector, or the technology sector, and things like that, it's employment-related issues, and that's why I spend so much time on the education issues, as you know. Comments?
Anyone
Can we
wanna-
get him a chair? Can we get him a chair here? Great points.
No one can stop you from talking, I don't think.
No, it's hard. So number one, I certainly respect not hearing from anyone about what my issues are, and every voter should hear from someone about what their issues are. So I 110% agree that that is a flaw for whoever is not sending, or everyone who's not sending a survey.
John.
Number one. I think the other piece is the employment issue. Sorry, I was going to go into the. You sure you're ready?
Her strength is not brevity, Don. Let her go.
It could be. Yeah, I'll work on it. I also think that from an employment perspective, in Nevada, I think back to the recession. I think at the time I was working with the College of Southern Nevada, and there were a lot of programs to do different things. And one of those was to start, we were starting with electronic health records. So we could retrain you. There were going to be all these jobs in electronic health records. And we've had 1,000 of those over the years of things that were going to transform our economy. And the number one response that I got as a person doing outreach at that time to people who were not working of various stripes was, I don't want to go back to school. I'll wait for the recession to be over. And so we have gotten people here because our education system is bad, period. And because we have these large employers and we don't have diversity in those other sectors, and in any other sectors, people are complacent with doing the jobs that they've always done. And so it is really hard to teach a young or old dog new tricks. As a new puppy owner, I know that the hard part is also on the young people. And if all we've ever done is allowed them to be status quo, and all we've ever expected in our education system specifically is for them to just graduate, that's all our expectation is that they graduate, then we know that when we have these economic downturns, when we have these recessions, it's really going to be hard for us to go from one to the other. And so from an employment perspective, I agree. I don't know that there is a political issue or a political solution to that specific issue for nonpartisans.
Go ahead, Don. Jump in.
Ray, in your first statement, I absolutely agree, experience the same thing about being a nonpartisan and getting very little political mail. But let me tell you, a change is going to come. This election in 22 is going to really test some partisans about their ability to communicate to NPs, especially at the state level, but perhaps even in some legislative districts.
And let me add to that, because he made a great point. You want to be heard. You want candidates whether you're D or R, to listen to you first. And I mean, free piece of advice, that's what we do. An organization with limited resources, we don't go and knock on a door and say, you're gonna go vote for this person. We listen to our voters. We listen to our community first. If you read one of our scripts, we wanna know what they care about. What are your concerns? What are your questions that you have? Why, and we're nonpartisan. So when we go out there and we're knocking on doors, I don't care whether you're gonna vote, unless we're running an accountability piece, because there are some candidates that need to be held accountable, and we cannot, take a step back and allow our community to continue to be attacked. So, but when we're knocking on doors, we are listening to people. I'm asking them, what do you care about? What are the top 5 issues that you care about? Okay, because people want to be heard, and not just through voting, but actually want to be heard that their issues, that your concerns matter. And then we go again, and that's what you always see us like knocking one, twice. Remember, I was here last week, and we talked about healthcare. Well, here's what's on the ballot on healthcare. Okay, here's what each candidate stands on healthcare, and here is. And now I'll come back next week, and then now let's talk about voting. Are you going to vote? Do you have a plan? Do you need help? Do you need a ride? Now that we're getting to the weeds of voting. But I think it's that aggressive approach to say, I'm entitled to your vote, and because I'm a Democrat or because I'm a Republican, you need to vote for one of us. It's really like taking it back to say, how do I earn your vote? How do I do that? And who's doing that?
Okay. So I want to get to all these questions. I also promised people that we'd be out around 7:30, so I'm going to ask for briefer answers, and not every panelist has to answer every question. So I may be a little bit stricter, so don't take it personally. Go ahead, introduce yourself, and please ask a question.
Thank you. My name is Gennady Stolirov II, and I appreciate all of your remarks today. They resonate with me because I am a nonpartisan in spirit, so much so that for nearly the past 6 years I have led a minor political party in Nevada, the Nevada Transhumanist Party. We've been registered since 2015 because I was so disillusioned with the toxicity, tribalism, ad hominem attacks thrown by both the Republicans and the Democrats. I look to the future, and I actually really find appealing the statement by Frank Luntz that technology is what seems to unite the Republicans and the Democrats. That's what the Transhumanist Party is for. But I see this gulf, and I'd like your comments on this gulf between public perception, what you have mentioned regarding the growing preponderance of nonpartisan voters on the one hand, and institutional dynamics that essentially through various contrivances keep out minor political parties through laws on ballot access thresholds, through essentially a situation where one does have to have tremendous campaign chests in order to compete in an election, through the media, which essentially silence coverage of minor political parties. Even at this very moment, the Democrats in the legislature are advocating for SB 292, which would increase the ballot access requirements for minor political parties to make it impossible for them to qualify via petition. So how do you foresee a resolution of this tension between a public that increasingly does not favor these tactics, but institutional parties that seem to want to tighten the screws of the system a bit?
What party are you with again?
The
I'm kidding. I'm just that was a joke about the media not caring about you. So you brought up a lot of interesting issues there, and you even got to like go against the legislative bill. Very, very, very impressive. You're gonna be elected to something someday, I have no doubt. But he brings up a really good point, and maybe I'll just throw this one at Don, because it is the greatest impediment. This will certainly be true of a national candidate who was independent or of a minor party. And those are the major parties write the ballot access laws. They can write laws to try to minimize the impact of a third-party candidate. How do you stop that?
That's the one thing they agree on.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
I frankly do not think that the probability of there ever being a third party, a viable third party, is a probability. I think there will be plenty of Andersons and Ross Perot's and so forth. And perhaps the function of these efforts is that if they gain some momentum, then one of the major parties will grab their issues and inculcate that into their platform. And so the probability of a third party nationally, I think, is minimal.
You're not thinking of a transhumanist filibuster, are you? I just want to make sure, because I see you're still there. Okay. I'm joking. Thank you. That was a great question. I appreciate it a lot. Come on up. Introduce yourself and ask a question.
Thank you so much this evening. I am very pleased to be here. My name is Gamaliel Enriquez, and I am particularly pleased, actually, to see a wonderful, educated, blonde mayor, African-American, and a Latina among older, wise men.
You saved yourself at the end there, pal.
A different generation. And the reason why I say that is because wisdom is collective, okay? We are all in this together. I think we all know, judging from the last crisis, the current crisis, COVID, right, that crises do not respect borders, okay? Or the other crises, for that matter, as well. So, long story short, my question is this. Let's talk about intersectionality. Let's talk about solutions to all of these intersectional problems, intergenerational problems that we have. Let's focus in on the solutions, collective solutions, okay? Because I have listened attentively to all of you. I have followed all of you for several weeks and days now. So the question is really how to move forward collectively, because the elephant here in the room that has really not been spoken about is that it's not necessarily about identity politics, not necessarily about generational politics. It's about a world in which is moving increasingly for a super ultra oligarchical elite.
So let me just
Hold on a second. No, please. No, please. It's my moment, please.
But
I'm asking the question.
There are others who want to ask questions.
I'm asking the question.
I understand
I am
that.
asking the question.
Okay, I'm waiting for the question.
Asking,
I'm waiting
so
for the question.
Please.
Yes, I'm
So
waiting for
the
a
question is, how do we all move forward? Because this is part of the system, okay? We all cannot be divided and conquered by race, by religion, by age, by women, by LGBTQ, etc. Okay? The bottom line here is, how do we move forward
Okay.
against...
No, sir.
And hold
sir,
on.
you
No,
got your
you
question. I'm going to
hold
ask the
on.
question.
No, you hold
I'm going to
on.
have to ask you to
No.
step back from the
No.
microphone, please.
You hold on.
No.
How do we move forward?
Okay. I'm going to ask the question. How do we
Okay,
move forward?
so no, I'm asking the question.
Oh.
How do we move forward?
Okay, thank you, thank you.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, so let me reframe the question. I'm gonna let the mayor talk about this, and I've heard in your voice tonight, and I know it just knowing you, some frustration, right? Having been mayor now for 7 years or so, a little bit more. I don't know whether you're going to run again or run for anything else. You can announce it here if you'd like. But he asks a good question in the sense that at some point, I mean, do you wake up in the morning some days and say, how do we move forward? There's so much divisiveness out there. There's so much tribalism. How do we move forward? Do you wake up in despair sometimes? And I'm just wondering what the answer to that question is. How do we move forward?
I think, again, it's, like, for me, it's really been sort of creating relationships with people around me that sort of I can identify with. And like I said, I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. I want to work with someone. I don't care, what that DRR looks like. I just want to get something done. And you start to find out who you can work with, who you can't work with, who is so, party line that you don't even go there. So you learn how to navigate, and it's really unfortunate. But I mean, you've got to, like I was talking about, I think you have to have more politicians speaking up about their parties and saying, if I really, I'm out there messaging to all of you, and you really walk the walk and talk the talk, I mean, then do it. So for me, it's really been about like navigating relationships and just, trying to really reach out to them and work with them. I think it's very interesting. I'll talk to people and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're a Democrat." Well, it depends on what issue we identify on, and then there'll be Republicans. "Oh, you're a Republican." So they really want to put nonpartisans like in these boxes with them. It's really interesting to kind of have these conversations. And then I think maybe it was you that it's like no surprise that COVID got so partisan. I mean, I even tweeted out that, like, hey, wear a mask. I know I'm a communist. You know what I mean? It was like crazy. So you have to just find out where you have those relationships. I have great relationships with some people that are known to be extremely right, on the right. And we can certainly, we have great conversation, great friendships, but also we can identify on, certain issues that they're probably more moderate on. But like I said, I mean, there's a lot of, I've always identified so much more with people and not party.
So I do want to make sure that everyone who wants to ask a question asks a question. So if we can keep the questions brief, and I'll just try to have one of the panelists, unless you really want to jump in, I don't want to inhibit anybody, but it is getting late. All of you have taken the time to be here, and I appreciate it, and so have these panelists, but I want to get to all the questions. Howard Beckerman. The infamous Howard Beckerman is now up at the microphone.
Thank you, sir. My question is for Mr. Carlson. But first, I'd just like to say for the two panelists on your left, you are both 100% correct that both parties attempt to put your particular minority into a box and assume that they are single issue or two issue people, and they do not inquire. They like to tell them what they should be voting on. And that goes for both parties. So you're both right. But for Mr. Carlson, my question is on the independent voter numbers. Do you have a breakout, a percentage of what the nonpartisans who have registered in the last 6 months or in the last year are from the DMV registration nonpartisan to the people who are actively changing their political party? Do you have that breakdown as a percentage? I'm interested in those who are going from a political party and changing to nonpartisan, what part of the nonpartisans they are. And the second part of that is, how is that broken down for those who are under, let us say, 65, as opposed to those who are younger, who are changing parties?
The numbers that I referred to is from data, my universe of data from registered voters presently. I think April is the deadline of my database, okay? And all I did was, for this evening, is to group by those 4 age cohorts.
So I guess, Howard, just because I don't want to belabor this, but let me just hone in on what he's referring to. He's trying to, I think, get a sense of active versus passive going to nonpartisans.
That's a whole nother model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any data on that?
I mean, it can be done.
I'm going to get that for you, Howard. I've asked for it. So
Thank you.
you should read The Independent. It would be a great help to you.
I read it daily.
I'm kidding. All right. That was a good question. No, thanks.
May I just
Go ahead, of course.
What is really interesting, if you want most interesting, is the date of registration. When did they become a registered NP? That is really provocative.
All right. Thanks. Mr. Goodman.
Good evening. Doug Goodman. We have a two-party system, like it or not. We also know that the tribalism that we've seen the last several years, people are leaving the major parties because the parties no longer represent them. Nevada also has closed primaries, even with same-day voter registration, where I, as a nonpartisan, can go up and register as a Republican or a Democrat and vote. It's still basically a closed primary. So you have fewer and fewer voters, especially when the turnout in a primary is 20%, determining the tribal representatives. And so also wanting to belong is human nature. So my question really is, if we went to a voting system that fostered collaboration, that basically forced candidates to talk issues, and I'm referring to, let's just say, the Alaska model that was just passed, top 4, nonpartisan, blanket primary, then using ranked choice voting in the general election. Do you think that nonpartisans, or any portion of people who have registered nonpartisan, because all of a sudden they see the parties now representing them, if the rhetoric got toned down, would actually go back to one of the major parties?
Go ahead.
Me again?
Oh, no, I thought you wanted to.
Oh, I do.
Okay, go.
So I think the answer to your question is yes, but I will obviously not briefly tell you why I think that. So one, I think you hit on the head. Everyone in here has said it's about the issues, right? Like, as long as you can do that, yes. If you have leaders and you're forcing them exclusive of party to collaborate and work together, you will have a more inclusive and representative process overall. And so I think ultimately that's what we tried to create with our democracy, is an ability for the best person to win, to represent as many people as possible, and to bring the greatest benefit to as many people as possible. And that would be a structural way to do that.
Please.
Hi, my name's Eric Denton, and my question follows up on Mr. Goodman's question, which is, at the current rate of change, which apparently has increased since the beginning of the year, that nonpartisans are emerging as a group, at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to have a Nevada electorate that is majority nonpartisan. Yet the two parties, as demonstrated in how the primary elections were changed a couple years ago, have a system now. My own representative for the state legislature was elected with less than 8% of registered voters in my district. There was no general election. I at no point was able to vote, even to ratify them. So at some point, I envision a situation where a nonpartisan majority in the not too distant future would look at these elections and say, is this a legitimate election? And by that, I do not mean complying with the laws. I mean the notion of political legitimacy. This is the rightful representative. Because when you have elections that are decided by fewer than 8% of registered voters on a more common basis, that is a real question, and I wondered if you agree with this and what you would see this as leading to, because the two parties do not seem to be prepared to open our primaries.
Anybody want to take this one? Okay. You want me to take it? Well, I'm
interested in what you think.
I am. No, sir, please sit down. Sir, please sit down. Don't ruin this event for everyone else. Please sit down. Please sit down. So here's my feelings. Here's my feeling about this issue, and I think Doug Goodman knows I feel this way. It seems to me that that is the solution is not opening up primaries. That parties should be allowed to choose who they want to choose to represent them. However, the system now is not working, and I'm not sure whether it's ranked choice voting or some other solution. But let me just tell you anecdotally, I was at the legislature today, and I talked to a legislator, and I asked him, and since this is going to be reported tomorrow, I'm not going to tell you who it was, but I said, I hear you're running for another office, which happens to be a nonpartisan office. And he said, you know what? I am. And one of the reasons is this has been such a frustrating session because the way it's set up now is that the far left and far right candidates are getting elected more, and then they won't talk to each other up here, and it's incredibly frustrating and unproductive, and so I'd rather do this. So even this is going, by the way, this is counter to the case that I'm making that there should be closed primaries. But I just think there's too much potential for mischief if you let nonpartisans vote in those primaries. But I have to tell you, and if you tell anybody I said this, Doug Goodman, I will deny it, is that I start to understand why people want ranked choice voting. I start to understand why people want some of these, what I would have thought before, Don, and I'll let you look like you're dying to say something, radical solutions to this problem.
Well, I would like a moment to challenge.
I thought you might.
Isn't it fascinating that the purpose of the general election, one of the purposes of the general election is to form a government. And the taxpayers pay for the general election. And isn't it fascinating that the taxpayers pay for the primary, and the primaries are for the parties to nominate. And so the parties have to be subsidized by the taxpayers, and the NPs are part of the taxpayers that pay that, and there's taxation without participation.
He's been waiting all night to say it. So, come on, let's our final, no, there's another question behind you. Go ahead, you're the penultimate question, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Mary Ann Denton, and I am a lifelong partisan, as is my husband, as is our 30-year-old son. And one of the things I've been hearing here is so-and-so became nonpartisan because they were so frustrated with Republicans, or they're sick of the Democrats. So they became nonpartisan. And what I'm hearing is they became apathetic. They didn't care anymore. For me, being a nonpartisan is about civic engagement. You mentioned STEM. I'm a scientist. I do a lot of public engagement on natural resources and biology because it helps with critical thinking. And for me, being a nonpartisan is being a good citizen and engaged in civic activities. So how do we move from people going, oh, I'm just gonna be a nonpartisan because I'm so sick of this party, to being a good citizen? Because I think if people committed to being a good citizen, regardless of your party, and believe me, my friends, far on the right, far on the left, are very suspicious of me because I won't commit. But I will commit to being a good citizen and doing my civic duty and trying to bring up my entire community with me. And how do you get the people who are now apathetic to become civically engaged?
There's a few things, and this morning too, and in some ways there was a discussion, right, and a fiscal note, and I think it was, I can't remember, it was the Secretary of State or one of, or the Elections Department that was either neutral or opposing, but they're talking about, well, what's going to constitute voter education? And Speaker Frierson said there's a lot of people doing that for free, which is true, because honestly, we're not getting our voter education from the Secretary of State. We're not getting voter education from our election departments. It's from community-based organizations. It's from family. It's from faith groups. I mean, it depends, right? We went back to the tribals and your circle and who's in your network. I would say this. We try, or our goal is to increase civic participation in the Latino community. And we try to do that first step going into high schools. I mean, it could be a whole different conversation, right? The amount of voter suppression. You know, we're trying to get into the high schools because this is not being taught in school. We go to high school, we do presentations. When we are allowed to, it's really challenging. I have emailed principals to say, we are, nonpartisan. We would never go in there. And we even have a whole presentation on why it's important to vote and why it's important for you to be registered. And one of the principals emailed me back and said, most of the students here are illegals, quoting her, right? Because I would never use that word. Like, how do you know? We're gonna understand like this also. In addition to people feeling that none of these parties represent me. I'm not on the far left or far right, or none of these parties represent me. None of them are listening to me. But also, let's talk. There's another issue. There's the voter suppression, and when we talk about people of color, the voter suppression and the lack of information for people of color.
So let me just say one thing, and then we'll take your question, and then we'll probably have to wrap things up. One of the most distressing things for me in covering politics for as long as I have, and it's been about 35 years, is to see, and it's gotten worse almost every successive cycle, is the growing alienation, which then translates into the apathy that she talked about, which is terrible for government. But do you know who likes that and exploits it? The people who are elected, who like to have fewer and fewer people engaged because it's easier to manipulate people that way, and it's terrible. It's just terrible. And so I am not going to resist an opportunity for a shameless plug of what my staff does every day and what I believe in. Everybody who knows me knows that I love the game of politics and I love the chess moves and I love analyzing this stuff. But when I started The Independent, it was partly because I saw this lack of voter education, and I wanted to get together a group of people who cared about doing in-depth stories. We don't have to do the story about the press conference of the politician attacking another politician. That's not educating anybody, right? But we want to do in-depth pieces on energy and health care, and we want to reach out to underrepresented groups like the tribes, and one of my reporters who was here has covered tribal politics and tribal issues that no one has ever done. We started a Spanish page because we knew that there was not a lot of good information going to the non-English speaking community. And by the way, we have not done enough as an organization to talk to African Americans and to talk. It was very simple in the old days. Oh, as you alluded to, it's just a small cohort. They live on the west side, and there's not. It's totally different than that, and we need to make a better effort. But and I still believe that the commitment made by the staff that I hired, who are amazing reporters and are willing to take the time to go in depth, I still believe that's the future model. I still believe there's enough people, not just the whatever 50, 60, 75 people in this room, that people want that. They want to make sense of an ever complex world. And so that is what we are committed to doing. It's difficult, but I cannot say again, and I know it's shameless, but the commitment of this staff to embrace that vision every day has been amazing to watch. All right, final question.
On.
You're welcome.
Can you hear me? Short. My name's Shane Del Cohen, and I've been a registered nonpartisan all of my adult life in Nevada. One, because of journalistic ethics, and the second, because working with tribes. And so my question to you is, when will you stop using the term tribalism as a negative?
Or minority.
Okay, I'll go there too, but I want to keep it brief, and I'm not known for being brief. The politics of tribes for the first 150 years in this country was survival. That was the politics. And you cannot talk to a tribal person that doesn't know federal and now state and local government more intimately than most people walking down the street in the United States. Now, politics in tribes is of conservatism, concern for the natural world, and the dedication to retaining our world for 7 generations hence. So while I really appreciate everything you've said and what the Indy is doing, I would really hope that all of you would encourage the abolition of the word tribalism in a negative sense. Thank you very much.
Anyone want to take that, or do we all just want to agree? Or
I'm definitely going to agree.
Agree.
And then we're definitely going to also include minority. When the U.S. Census numbers come out, this will be a majority POC state, people of color, and they will no longer be a minority. Minority is a mathematical calculation. It is not a person. So we're changing all of the lexicon together.
I say I agree, and thank you for bringing that up. And more of a comment to see that how, again, the need for people to feel like they need a space where they are heard, because most of the folks here that ask questions are nonpartisans. So I'm assuming that a lot of your audience today are nonpartisans, and so we.
Let's take a poll. I want to know. How many of you in here are R's? Raise your hand.
Nonpartisans.
How many of you are D's? And how many nonpartisans?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay,
So we created a space today to have a discussion when you feel like you're discussing. Now we're appealing to something that you care about.
So that's a great note to end on, and I want to emphasize with the last question is something I'm guilty of, but it is important. Language matters, and I remember, Cecia will appreciate this. I carelessly referred in a tweet. This is a long time ago. To someone being an illegal immigrant, and it's a terrible phrase. No person is illegal. And if I could show you the text message I got from Astrid Silva after I did that, and Astrid is a friend of mine, but it's become part of the lexicon now, right? And it's used to demean people, to other people. And you're right about the changing demographics of this state, and it's something that I, as an editor, should be more conscious of, and we all try to be. So that, Shane, that was a great question to end on. I do want to say that I thank all of you for taking your time. This was a great, robust, substantive discussion. It's the kind of thing that we try to do at the Indy, and I appreciate all of you taking the time to come out, and I even more appreciate the panel up here. I had actually never interacted with either of you before. You're both not just delightful, but really impressive, and you added a lot to the conversation. Thank you so much to both of you for coming, and to my two old friends, I guess one young friend. Thank you so much for coming as well. It's great to see both of you, and thanks again for just a great discussion, and thanks for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. Oh, by the way, I should say this, or my staff will kill me. I want to do it one more time, since it's going out in the live stream. Thank our sponsors: Caesars Entertainment in the Row, Carrera Nevada Government Affairs, Kemfer Kroll, and the Reno Sparks Chamber of Commerce. If you're interested in sponsoring an Indy event like this, we're going to have many more like this, Carson City Chamber of Commerce, and you are welcome to be a sponsor. Thanks to everybody for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. No, definitely. You're going to help?